Friends, happy Epiphany to all of you. We're probably not as used to saying that as Merry Christmas. In the Orthodox churches, I understand Epiphany really is one of the central celebrations of the year. But I think for many of us, it can feel a little bit like an afterthought. A Christmas card that arrives a week and a half late. Or a present that got stuck somewhere behind the tree and you only find when you're ready to take things down and store them away for another year. It can feel like an afterthought, but really, it's a present well worth opening. And when we do, we find something quite wonderful. We find that Epiphany is a day of grandeur. I mean, just look at that story we read from Matthew a moment ago. There's grandeur in this image of wise men from the east following stars across a desert landscape. We've turned them into kings in popular tellings of the story, even though the Bible never says that. But somehow it just feels right. There's something very regal and grand about these mysterious figures reading the signs in the sky and traveling across nations to kneel down before a baby. There's grandeur in those gifts that they bring with them. Gold and frankincense and myrrh. These were not typical baby shower gifts in first century Palestine, any more than they are in our culture today. They're gifts for a king or a priest or a prophet, costly and richly symbolic. Hopefully someone also thought to bring some diapers. There's grandeur in the palace scene that comes before this visit to Bethlehem. Herod in his palace receiving these strange exotic visitors who are not exactly your usual travelers or merchants passing through town, and calling on his own wise ones for their opinion on what is happening, what's afoot in the world. There's grandeur in the music that goes with this day, all these big, beautiful hymns we sing. And there's grandeur even and especially in that name. The name Epiphany conjures up radiant light, revelations, a moment of great realization or breakthrough. In artwork of the Epiphany, everybody seems to have glowing halos around their heads, right? All of that can seem like kind of a lot of pressure for a day in church. We can't promise epiphanies for everyone today, but I do hope we glimpse something together. So Epiphany is this day of grandeur in the church, of big celebrations of light and life emanating from the gift of this child. But what I am also struck by this year is that alongside all that grandeur is something very common, very ordinary, very unremarkable. There's ordinariness to the town of Bethlehem. Our carols, of course, turn this into an idyllic little town, tailor-made for Christmas cards. But the point about Bethlehem seems to be the fact that it really wasn't anything particularly special. It was an ordinary town on the edge of the desert, overlooked by the powerful, dusty and unremarkable, a place that you could very well miss. There's ordinariness in the family that the wise men find beneath the star. This is an ordinary mother and father, a couple of first-time parents, likely as nervous and tired as any parents would be. And there's actually ordinariness in this child. Matthew doesn't tell us that Jesus was levitating when the visitors arrived with their gifts, or giving theological presentations, or even blazing with some otherworldly light. The way Matthew tells it, there's actually nothing all that supernatural about the scene of the wise men's arrival. Nothing out of the ordinary. What they find is a child, probably sleeping or eating like any soft-skinned newborn. That's what you find in the Epiphany story. This juxtaposition of the grand and the ordinary, side by side. So there's kind of a Star Wars here. I'm sorry, I couldn't resist the analogy this week. There are these dazzling stars of grandeur, the kings and the palaces and the gifts. And there are these much dimmer, much more ordinary stars of a simple family, an unremarkable town, an ordinary newborn baby. They're all twinkling there, beside each other in the same sky. And the wise men face this starry sky with precisely those options. They travel these great distances. They make it to this foreign country with their gifts and their wishes. And where do they go first? They go to the palace. They go to the place where you would expect a king to be born. They go to the place of grandeur, to the dazzling star, when it turns out that they need to be looking in a place far more ordinary. I was reminded of a poem this week by the Norwegian poet Rolf Jacobsen. It's very short, and it's called simply Shh. Shh, the sea says. Shh, the small waves at the shore say. Shh, not so violent, not so haughty, not so remarkable. Shh, say the tips of the waves crowding around the headland surf. Shh, they say to people, this is our earth, our eternity. That may not sound very much like an Epiphany poem, given that notable lack of kings and gifts and light and baby Jesus. But those words, not so violent, not so haughty, not so remarkable, have been with me like a quiet drumbeat this week. We've just flipped the calendar to a new year again, and we're leaving behind a year that I think feels very complex, even alongside other complex years. We've seen civil wars and conflicts continuing to divide many countries. We've seen immense numbers of migrants and refugees on the move, and many courageous efforts to find solutions. We've seen continued realization of the damage being done to the earth and some hopeful attempts at new resolve for action. And undoubtedly, it's been a complex year for you as well. What year isn't? And here on the cusp of a new one, when we make resolutions and dream about what's next, we're faced with the choice of stars as well. Are our eyes fixed on something grand and dazzling? Heroic resolutions that will finally make our lives or our bodies or our spirits perfect this year. Plans for the perfect job or the perfect family. Plans for more money, more stuff, more whatever it is we think we need. Are our eyes fixed on those dazzling stars? Or are they fixed on something much more ordinary? On the imperfect people around us? On a creation that desperately needs our attention and love? On the grace we've been given? The struggles for justice that continue? Community that simply needs us, just the way we are. The Epiphany story, with its star that stops not over the dazzling palace of Herod, but over the stable in Bethlehem, wants us to train our eyes for the ordinary and the dim lights around us. Shh, the sea says, not so haughty, not so remarkable. Maybe one way to think about this is to come back to those halos that show up over the heads so much on Epiphany artwork. There's a beautiful example on the cover of your bulletin if you want to take a look. Those big gold circles there can look like a mark of grandeur. And yeah, of course they are. They don't show up around the heads of just anybody. But if we think they only show up on the heads of saintly types, of extraordinary people who've never even thought about doing anything wrong, then we are off the mark. Those big gold circles represent a face shining with light. And the word for that shining in Greek, the word for that is epiphaneia, or epiphany. Those people with the shining faces don't represent morally or spiritually perfect people. They represent people who've gotten an experience that's incredible, who have glimpsed the glory of God, and who've had that kind of epiphany. So the painting on that bulletin cover from more than 600 years ago in Italy is filled with those gold circles. This is just one little part of that painting. It's a huge altarpiece, I think. So they're there over Mary and Joseph and the child, of course. They're there over the three wise men, who are actually kings in this painting. You almost expect to see one over the cow. It's a holy moment. Earth and heaven are close together. Grandeur is all over the place. But look at how ordinary the scene is at the same time. 2 parents and a baby. Animals lingering in the background. Visitors with gifts for the newborn. An old man down on his hands and knees, playing with the baby like you or I would. Yes, the baby is also blessing the old man, which doesn't always happen. But basically, take away all those bright, big circles, and the scene is profoundly ordinary. And I have to think that's how it appeared at the time. Did the wise men see halos hovering over the heads of this family and the baby there in the dusty stable? Did the people they met on their way back home see old men with faces shining with gold? Somehow I doubt it. These were ordinary people, after all. The parents, the travelers, and it was in their midst that the supreme gift of God showed up. The grand and the ordinary are side by side in this story, and that's exactly the way it should be. Because the epiphany of this story, the truth that it finally reveals, is that God's grandeur is found in such an ordinary place. Shh, say the waves. Not so violent, not so haughty, not so remarkable. The grandeur of God is found in ordinary places. The star is here, over a table set simply with bread and wine, over these ordinary human lives, over this ordinary, blessed, and broken world. Take heart. The gift of God is here. Amen.